I was having such a lovely holiday, and then all hell broke loose around Bambu Lab. I've spoken to many people, including the CEO, Dr. Tao, and in this video, I'm going to give you my take. There's been a lot of drama and some very hot takes on this topic, but this video won't be that. I've taken my time and I've spoken to many people, my patrons, members of the X1 Plus team, and even Bambu Lab CEO, Dr. Tao. So join me as we take a measured approach. I have to start with a big thank you for all the kind words and well wishes that came after the video in which I announced I was taking January off. I was having an excellent time getting to see the Wanderers, teaching the kids how to kayak, and going on a family trip to Canberra to visit their Festival of Speed. I finally got my race car on track for the first time. However, a mechanical failure meant it only lasted 1.5 laps. I was enjoying spending time on various hobbies, even building some McLaren Lego. And then this happened. It's been covered to death, so this is a very brief recap. On January 16th, Bambu Kid posted on the Bambu Lab blog about updates to Bambu Lab software in the name of fixing security. In short, elements of the system were being locked down, with operations described as critical, no longer accessible from third-party software. 4 days later, in response to public outrage, came a second blog post by Spaghetti Monster, which is Bambu Lab CEO Dr. Tao. It claimed it was addressing misinformation and setting the facts straight, including a list of claims the community had made that simply weren't true. Furthermore, in response to community feedback, Bambu Lab were introducing a developer mode to retain some functionality, giving users more control over what they could do on their local network, but forsaking customer support for this feature. Finally, there was a video demonstration of Bambu Connect, the middleman application that would handle communication between third-party software like OrcaSlicer and the actual printer. The aim of this video, to show that the workflow was still quick and efficient despite the extra steps. In addition to the details on this blog post, more content was added to the original one, although I'm not sure if this dated note was here all along, prompting people to allege that Bambu Lab was doing a dishonest bait and switch and misrepresenting the community outrage. And outrage there was, from 3D printing Reddit, other forums and community groups, and a whole bunch of videos on YouTube discussing the controversy and giving their opinion. There's some other significant resources that we will be discussing, including this interview on The Verge, where they put some questions directly to Bambu Lab. I've linked it below for you to look at more closely. Another important blog post was released around the time I covered the Panda Touch, although this one mainly discussed the emergence of X1 Plus and Bambu Lab's decision to officially allow this community firmware. In it, Bambu Lab talked about future changes to APIs and SDKs for third-party developers. And at that time, Big Tree Tech released their own video explaining that users should not update their Bambu Lab firmware in case it breaks integration with Panda Touch. So the locking down of Bambu Lab third-party software communication has been known about to some extent for some time now. We're going to start our analysis with some context that I think is important. The first area of context we need to bring up is called Enshitfication. And even if you aren't able to define it, there's a good chance you know exactly what it is from stories you've heard. There are prominent cases around 2D printers, specifically HP. They released an all-in subscription plan where you need to pay a monthly fee to use your printer. Prices escalate depending on how much you're printing, and if you want to cancel, you better be ready to pay a big fee. Furthermore, I've seen stories about the scanner on these printers not working unless you top up with fresh ink. There's plenty of other companies following this same approach, like car companies, where features that used to just come with the car are all of a sudden locked behind a paywall and you need to subscribe to use them. All of this leads to the idea that it's very hard to own things these days. Instead, you have a paid subscription service. Like most people, I personally hate this, and I prefer to use legacy software that I've already paid for and own outright. So does Enshitfication already apply to 3D printing? Well, yes. As pointed out in the Uncle Jesse video, MakerBot went down a similar path with disastrous results. Another example from the past is the DaVinci by XYZ, a 3D printer that had DRM filament, meaning you were locked into their ecosystem. And in the worst case scenario, that company is now shutting down, meaning sooner rather than later, any customers will be completely stranded. Fortunately, the community has had custom firmware available for years now. The next piece of important context, in my opinion at least, is the maker community. Compared with 2D printing, the 3D printing scene is very unique in that it's built on community efforts from the RepRap movement. The concept of RepRap was that each printer could replicate itself by printing the parts for another. So it was open source collaboration rather than profit that drove this technology forward for many years. And despite companies like Bambu Lab moving away from RepRap by offering proprietary software firmware, as well as manufacturing their machines from injection molding and other techniques that are hard to copy, we still see the community finding a way, like X1 Plus community firmware, completely open source 3D printers you can build yourself, like those from the not-for-profit Voron design team, and of course many community developed mods like PolyDye, which I featured at the end of last year. The maker community, with its preference for collaboration, modifying it and customizing their hardware, still has a lot of sway. And despite 3D printing slowly becoming more mainstream, at this stage at least, it's still niche enough. Potential customers are going to turn to YouTube for reviews before they buy anything, which means channels like mine have a lot of power and influence for holding manufacturers accountable. But having said that, we need to remember the maker community is quite small. My understanding is that Bambu Lab have millions of printers in the world now, and the vast majority of those won't even know what open source is, let alone care about it. Bambu Lab will make decisions based on the majority of their users rather than a niche group. Something that can't be avoided in all of this is that Bambu Lab is a Chinese company, and many people have strong feelings about that. Chinese companies always face increased scrutiny compared to their Western counterparts. A good example of this is the near banning of TikTok in the United States, despite the fact that companies like Google and Meta do just as much data harvesting and treat their users as the product. The fact Bambu Lab has been as successful as they have been in this space, despite being a Chinese company and not being open source, tells you just how well they've done in making 3D printers a tool instead of a project for a reasonable price tag. But for many people, there's still concern in the back of their minds. That's why when Prusa launched the Core 1, their blog post has a section talking about security and playing on those fears. Let's move on to the confirmed impacts of these changes. So what are the confirmed impacts of this security change? The main restrictions from these updates is the lockdown of MQTT communication. That means third-party options like the X-Touch as well as the Panda Touch from Big Tree Tech will have very limited functionality. I've used and made videos on both of these and I'm not very happy about that change. One thing I don't personally use, but I know my patrons do, is controlling their printers via an Internet of Things system like Habitat. If these rely on MQTT, they're going to be limited as well. Another scenario not relevant to me, but relevant to others, is the use of Bambu Lab printers in print farms. If they're using software to help manage that utilizes MQTT, again, they're going to be limited. Probably the main casualty here is Orca Slicer. And previously, Orca Slicer used the Bambu Studio network plugin to offer the same seamless control integration as Bambu Studio. So that's controlling the printer as well as starting prints automatically from within the slicer. We know that Orca Slicer can only retain this functionality by interfacing with the Bambu Connect middleman software. And while the demo doesn't look terrible, it's still objectively a step backwards for those using Orca Slicer. Bambu Studio is the only open source component of the whole software chain, and if you check the release history on GitHub, you can see that it's frequently benefited from the work of the community who have created new features and improvements for Prusa Slicer and Orca Slicer. Because of that, Bambu Studio is now a better product, so it seems a slap in the face to degrade Orca Slicer in return. It's also worth mentioning that Bambu Connect is currently not available for Linux, which means those users are stuck. A small win in all of this was the backing down to some extent by allowing developer mode. If this is turned on, MQTT access will be retained, but this is tied to LAN mode, which currently means losing the functionality of the Bambu Handy app. Oh, and customer support for this aspect, so it's still a step back compared to the current experience. So yes, in several ways, the user experience will be objectively worse compared to what we have now. We know this for a fact, but other claims are more tenuous. There has been a lot of speculation as to what might be coming, so let's work through some of the big claims. I think a lot of the fear is based on the fact that Bambu Lab have said they're doing this to increase security, and I have no expertise in this area, but something I've consistently heard is that a system like OAuth 2 would be a proven and much better approach than what Bambu Lab has proposed, and this was proven to some extent when Bambu Connect was reverse engineered and compromised almost immediately. The argument I've heard is that if Bambu Lab is not using a proven system, then Bambu Lab must be using their own one to achieve something nefarious. Now, a lot of these things have been explicitly denied by Bambu Lab in the article from The Verge, but let's look for evidence elsewhere to support this. Let's look at the idea that filament will be locked down to only that supplied by Bambu Lab. On all current models, the RFID reader is only contained in the AMS, and that means that anytime you print without an AMS from the external spool, you're free to use whatever filament you want, whether Bambu Lab likes it or not. So to implement this, Bambu Lab would need to force every customer to print through an AMS, and that means purchasing it if they didn't already have one. Not only would this decision make their printers a lot less appealing compared to every other brand, but this added layer would be even more unpopular. What about the printers being locked down behind a paid subscription? Beyond general distrust, I think this one comes from the section on print farm management software. Bambu Lab state that they've developed their own tool for this, and on the wiki page for this tool, there is a mention that it's currently free, but future paid functions might arrive. So for people that run print farms, this one is the most plausible. However, I think it's most unlikely that general printing is ever locked behind a subscription, simply because it would be stupidly unpopular and the backlash and cost of sales would be immense. On top of that, Bambu Lab was launched by people who used to work for DJI, so we can look at that company to help us predict the future. No subscription is needed to operate their products, and the only subscription is an optional one that acts like an extended warranty. What about printers being bricked or disabled if you don't upgrade the firmware? What doesn't look good about this one is in that Bambu Lab's Terms of Service 0.7.4 says that due to the importance of these updates, your product may block new print jobs before the update is installed. And I'd have to say that matches the 2 points raised here. I would hope, however, that much of what is in this document is there just in case of the worst case scenario. Let's say a threat came out that allowed people to try and set your printer on fire easily. This is a nuclear option to resolve this. I think we've seen Bambu Lab do something similar to this a bit over a year ago, when they filed a bunch of patents relating to 3D printing, and at the time it was speculated that they were going to litigate and try and remove all of their competition. But so far at least that hasn't come to pass, and I think that was another example where they were getting things in place for the worst case scenario. Now obviously I don't have a crystal ball, but it's my opinion and hope that these outcomes won't eventuate. And it was clear from talking to Dr. Tao that he's very aware how destructive it would be for the company if they were to follow through on some of these claims. So for me, I think most of this saga can be attributed to poor communication. Firstly, I think it's correct that Bambu Lab are trying to beef up security, and they have their own wiki page to document some of the abnormal traffic that they can see and we can't. They need to protect themselves from litigation if a loophole is left open. So why aren't they following well-proven paths? I don't necessarily think it's because of malice. In the past, there's been issues with the cloud access, and perhaps Bambu Labs are just better at building hardware than they are at managing the network side. One thing's for sure, considering the context we discussed earlier, they should have handled the announcement very differently, especially considering the fear over them being a Chinese company. I think reaching out to trusted members of the community to get the feedback before the big announcement would have been wise, and that would have brought to light some of the potential concerns, which means they could have gotten on the front foot in the initial blog post to emphatically squash conspiracies. Better planning and communication probably could have avoided the majority of the heat. Some of you will be wondering what I will personally be doing going forward. Orca Slicer was already my #1 choice, especially when they added support for the Prusa XL. The lead developer Softfever has stated they will not be supporting Bambu Connect for the foreseeable future. I appreciate their work and I stand by them. I'm also still happily using a Panda Touch on my P1P and I don't want to lose its functionality either. So I will be leaving everything as is and not updating any of the firmware on my Bambu Lab printers unless something significant changes. And I will take this opportunity to remind X1 owners that they have the option to switch to the X1 Plus community firmware and hopefully avoid much of the drama. And the final thing that I've already done is take the opportunity to express my concerns directly to the CEO of Bambu Lab and urge him to reconsider the impacts on the maker community. One more thing, in the Verge interview, the phrase for current models was used a bit, and personally I think that's quite reasonable, but myself and many others will be watching future releases like a hawk to see if there's a shift in the company's direction. I'm conscious that I'm an optimist and the worst case scenario could still happen, but it must be said that I've dealt with a few dodgy companies over the years running this channel, but Bambu Lab has never been one of them. I'm disappointed by the limiting of third-party options, but I'm definitely not on the conspiracy bandwagon. I honestly think that unfortunately, us makers are a small but vocal portion of the customer base, and we've been caught in the crossfire of Bambu Lab's growing pains. If you've made it this far, I hope you appreciate that I've avoided doing rage bait and instead tried to use my influence and platform to try and bring forward positive change, just like I did with the emergence of X1+. Let me know in the comments section what you think about this whole saga. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy 3D printing. G'day, it's Michael again. If you like the video, then please click like. If you want to see more content like this in future, click subscribe and make sure you click on the bell to receive every notification. If you really want to support the channel and see exclusive content, become a patron. Visit my Patreon page. See you next time.